Hello, Year 4. Are you all okay? Today, in our history lesson, we are going to be continuing learning about the Anglo-Saxons. Today, we are going to be focusing more about how they have influenced Britain through their place names. So by the end of this lesson, you'll be able to match up Anglo-Saxon place names to their root meanings. You'll also be able to label a map of Britain to show some Anglo-Saxons county, city, and town names. To start with, you do have a retrieval question here. Now, using this picture, you might recognise it from last lesson. How much can you remember from our last lesson about the inside of an Anglo-Saxon house? What could you see here, and what do you remember about how they lived inside an Anglo-Saxon house? Pause the video and have a little bit of a think, or if someone next to you, have a bit of a chat with them, okay? Off you go. Okay, did you remember what I remembered? Let's have a look. So, we can see that in the house we have different foods such as meat and fish which are hung up on the ceiling so that the smoke can cure it and make sure that it can be kept for a long time so they can keep it. The walls of the house, did you remember that they're made out of planks of wood? Did you remember of that fire in the middle of the room, making sure that it not only provides the house, the family with warmth, but also light, and also being able to cook their food there? Did you remember the large barrel holding that beer to drink, keeping it nice and cool? Did you remember that unfortunately most houses only had one room, so they had to do everything in that room? They had to cook, they had to clean, they had to sleep, they had to do their activities in that one room, which was their house. Did you remember the roof was made with straw? Did you remember that people had to entertain themselves by playing musical instruments? They did not have mobile phones or computers or iPads like we have now and games on those. They had to entertain themselves another way. Okay, now giving you a final retrieval question now. Go back in time to when we learnt about the Romans, okay? So, I've got 3 questions here for you. The first 2 are multi-choice to help you a bit, but then the third question, what is an auxiliary soldier, is not multi-choice, okay? Work your way through these 3 questions, please. Pause the video now. Okay, so the Romans were such a long time ago. I wonder if you can remember how many soldiers are in one legion. Fantastic. 5,000 soldiers are in one legion. Who was in charge of the first and second attempt at conquering Britain? Was it A, Emperor Hadrian, B, Julius Caesar, or C, Emperor Claudius? That's right, it was B, Julius Caesar. Who was Emperor Hadrian in charge of? What did he order? That's right, he ordered Hadrian's Wall to be built. And Marcus, I'm sure you still remember the date that it was built, which was 122 AD. And why was Emperor Claudius significant during the Romans era? Do you remember, Year 4? That's right, he was in charge during the third and final attempt at conquering Britain. Finally, do you remember what an auxiliary soldier is? An auxiliary soldier is a soldier who is not Roman. They are recruited from non-Roman tribes because they provide that extra manpower, that strength, and also those specialised fighting techniques. Okay, so we're going to be doing a few more of these retrieval questions, not only for our Anglo-Saxon topic, but also way back to our Roman time as well. So, today we are going to be looking at the Anglo-Saxons and also how they had an influence on Britain. We're going to be looking at lots of different place names, and you're going to be learning lots and lots about where those place names came from, the place names that you might be very, very familiar with. Now, first of all, it's really important to understand that when the Anglo-Saxons settled, what they did was they couldn't take over Wales or Cornwall. They didn't actually rule those places. But the areas that they did rule, they divided them into 7 groups, and they called these groups their 7 kingdoms. So if you look at our map here, down here in this green patch is Cornwall. Just above it is Wales. Now, in these 2 areas, the Anglo-Saxons did not rule these areas, so therefore they did not have one of their 7 kingdoms covering this area. Similarly, where do you think this is? That's right, it's Scotland. Do you remember which 2 groups of people settled in Scotland? That's right, the Picts and the Scots, they settled in Scotland, didn't they? Fantastic. So we can see here that the rest of Britain in the coloured sections were divided into 7 different kingdoms. So we have got Northumbria was one kingdom, Essex was another kingdom, Wessex was another kingdom, Sussex, Mercia, Kent, and East Anglia. Now, we've heard of some of these before. We've had a little bit of a discussion about some of these, but where did these place names come from and what do they mean? Can you pause the video and have a bit of a think for me, please? Okay, let's have a look and see if you were right, and we're going to see where each of these places came from. So, these names mainly came from the names of geographical location of the Anglo-Saxons who first settled here. So, when the Anglo-Saxons came along, they split this area of Britain up into 7 kingdoms. And the first part was called Northumbria. And this is for the people who were living north of the River Humber. So if you see here that the River Humber was running along this line here, and the north of that is Northumbria. And we can see here that Humbria sounds a bit like Humber. That's where it got its name from the River Humber to be Northumbria. Now, we did have a little bit of a chat that East Anglia is called East Anglia because it's where the Angles first settled. So they first settled over here, and that's where it's got its name from. Similarly, Sussex was named Sussex because that's where the South Saxons first settled, and you can see it is in the south. Essex, do you remember who settled there? That's right, it was the East Saxons. So who settled in Wessex then? Yes, it was the West Saxons. So you had the Angles here, the East Saxons, the South Saxons, the West Saxons. So in Mercia, this is where the border people settled. So border people, any of these black lines here are the borders between each of the kingdoms. So it's the area that separates, say, East Anglia from Mercia, Northumbria from Mercia, Wessex from Mercia, Essex from Mercia. It splits up the 2 kingdoms from each other, and these border people lived in this area. And finally, in Kent, we've spoke about this before, the Jutes, who also settled in Britain, they settled in Kent. And this is named because they called themselves the Kentings. So that comes from the Kent, okay? So it's just down here, okay? I'm going to see if you remember in the next session who settled in each of these kingdoms, okay? So, now, many of the towns and villages that we know in Britain today also came from the Anglo-Saxons. Have you noticed that many place names share some similarities, and actually they look pretty similar with how they are worded? I would like you to look at the following signposts. These have examples of some of the suffixes that are in some of our well-known towns and villages from Britain today. I want you to think, how many place names can you think with the ending of ham, with the ending of ford, with the ending of worth? Pause the video and have a think, please. Okay, let's see if you figured out the same as me or you got some different ones. So, for ham, you might have said Birmingham, Tottenham, or Nottingham. Ford, you might have said Bradford, Hereford, Oxford. Worth was a little bit trickier, some that you might not have heard of, Tamworth, Kenilworth, and Bedworth. So all of these places ending in ham come from the Anglo-Saxons. All of these places ending in Ford come from the Anglo-Saxons. And all of these places ending in Worth come from the Anglo-Saxons. But what do these endings actually mean? What does ham mean? Because it's not the food in the Anglo-Saxon terms. What does Ford mean? What does Worth mean? We're going to have a look about that now. So, on my table, it shows the Anglo-Saxons had named places using words which had different meanings. So I'm going to talk to you about the table, and I want you to be looking at it thinking, what does that mean? So for this first one, burr, so This means it's a town. So any place ending in "-er" means that it's a town. Now we haven't got any examples because today lots of towns and places that are in the Anglo-Saxon times have changed their wording now. So we don't have any spelt like that. But if we look at the second example, Bury, this Bury means that it's a place that is in a fortified place. Now, you might be thinking, what is a fortified place? Does anyone know? Fortified place is a place that is protected. So a place that might be protected by, for example, the army, the military, okay? Now, places that are named after this Bury are Banbury, Shaftesbury. Now, these places now, today, aren't fortified places, but back in the Anglo-Saxon time, they would have been a fortified place. They would have been a place that had been protected. If a place ends in croft, it means that it's a small enclosure. So this might be like a small area, like a farm, for example. Okay. Another one, field. If it ends in field, if a place ends in field in the Anglo-Saxon times, they know that it's going to be a place which has got open land. So lots and lots of land spread around. If a place ends in ford, like Stamford, this means that it's a river crossing. So through Stamford might be a river and people can cross that river. Now, that might mean that it's not the same today because that's back in the Anglo-Saxon time. We've looked at this one before, ham. So this could be ham with one M or ham with a double M. Now this word ham, if you see this at the end of one of a place like Birmingham, it means a village. Now we know today that Birmingham is not a village anymore, but in the Anglo-Saxon times, it was a village. And they knew that because they found a place that had ended in ham, it meant that it was a village. So each of these suffixes on the end of the words to make these places all had different meanings. So all the Anglo-Saxon people knew, well, if it has this meaning, it's this type of place. If it has this meaning, it's this type of place. Let's look at this one down here because this one's pretty interesting. If a place ends in ing or ings, it means that it belongs to someone's people. So if we take the place Woking, now Woking is named after something. You're going to learn this in your learning today. But in the Anglo-Saxon day, if it ended in ing or ings, it meant that it had a specific leader of that place. So if it was Reading, Reading ends in ing, there was a specific, that those chieftains, so those really high up people who owned the land, they controlled that place. So it would be someone who would control Reading, someone would control Woking. Looking at this one here, ending in Lee, if it ends in Lee, like Henley, it means that it's like a clearing. Do you remember what a clearing is? That's right, a clearing is like an open area in a forest. So at one point during the Anglo-Saxon times, Henley, because it ended in L-E-Y, it meant that they knew that this was going to be a place with a clearing. Similarly, if a place ended in mer, M-E-R or M-E-R-E, like Cromer, then it would be like a pool or a lake that would be surrounding this place, okay? If it ended in N-E-Y, it would be like an island place. Stow, or stow with an E on the end, like Padstow, would mean that it's a meeting place or a holy place. So now, Padstow is an area in Cornwall, right at the bottom of Britain, and at one point during the Anglo-Saxon time, it was a meeting place for them. If it ends in ton or tun, it means it's a farmstead. Now, do you know what a farmstead is? Sounds a bit like farm, but a farmstead is the buildings that make the farm. Whereas a farm, which they'd use to sound wick and witch, farm is more like the animals, the land, okay? So words such as Greenwich, Woolwich, Butterwick, these are all names of places that were on a farm or had a farm surrounding them. And finally, worth or worthy means an enclosure. Again, this area of land. So like Tamworth used to be an area which was an enclosure. Now, we can tell here that lots of Anglo-Saxons name places using these words, because if they knew that a place had a name and it had the end of a word, they knew automatically what that place would be. Now I am going to explain the rest of the video on a part 2. So if you want to go over to that now, Year 4, please.